This is the Padua Podcast Network.
These women they're now considered the grandmothers of feminism, and what it is that they were trying to promote. And looking at kind of the underbelly of this movement, and it is not pretty. There is just a lot of incredibly broken people who, we know broken people break other people, and that's exactly what has happened.
Thriving in the Trenches. It's the podcast where you will hear stories from real people with real purpose, all for a God who loves us with a real love. The Trenches, where life isn't always easy, but it is a place for women to be encouraged and equipped to uniquely and universally serve Christ in their feminine vocation. So, together, let's go deeper in our faith in God, in His church, and in our friendships. You are welcome here. Welcome to Thriving in the Trenches podcast. This is Becky Carter, and I am your host. Well, hello there. Here we are. I am, I wouldn't love an episode if I didn't love the topic or love the person that I get to interview. And so I'm always really excited, and that probably seems very redundant to you as a listener. Like, Becky, you're always excited. You always love such and such. But, when I choose a topic or I choose a guest, it really is for a reason. And I don't take those decisions lightly, and I don't just do something because someone has asked me to do it or a book promo or whatever. The topic has to really touch my heart, because then I know that I can give you my best, because my heart has been pricked as a way of something important to share with you that will help you in your journey with the Lord, and to grow in holiness and to reject the lies of the world, because really the world is stealing our happiness, and I don't want to walk in that anymore. And if I genuinely love you as my sister in Christ, and those brothers in Christ out there that I know listen to the podcast, then I don't want you to walk in that bondage either. I don't want you hearing the lies and believing them. So when I was scheduling out this season, I knew that I wanted to have Carrie Gress back on the podcast. She was in season 2, I believe. I'm not very good. I don't know all my episode numbers, but she had originally talked with us about the Ave Maria, and through that conversation, actually a friendship grew, and we have encouraged and supported and even worked together on several different ventures. And so I have had the privilege to become Carrie's friend and know her. And she's just a very genuine, heart-warming person that loves the Lord, strives to be holy, and really just wants the truth out there. And so she wrote this little book. It's called The Ave Maria Exposed, the Toxic Femininity, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. It's a tan book, and it is not the easiest read. It's difficult. It's not a light read. It definitely takes some brain power. It did for me, and I had to do a lot of Googling and making sure I understood exactly what the word meant so that I could get the full context of what she was trying to share. She talks about the errors of Russia. Well, I had no clue really what that means. Well, Our Lady of Fatima talks about the errors of Russia and how they will spread throughout the world if we do not experience conversion. And so I didn't know what that meant. And Carrie did a really good job of not giving a full history lesson, but she definitely started to open my eyes on what that meant. And then I could see the connection between the errors of Russia and where we are and are heading deeper into here in the Western world. So But it is a good book. It's an important book. And she ends it talking about Our Lady and how Our Lady is our hope. And for us to become full of grace like Our Lady means that we have to work hard at becoming virtuous, work hard practicing those virtues and asking God's grace every step of the way. So if you are not familiar with Carrie Gress, she does have her doctorate in philosophy from the Catholic University of America. She's also the editor of the online magazine, Theology of Home, which is a great little resource. You can get 10 curated articles in your email box every morning, and it really focuses on the truth, the goodness, and the beauty that we as women are attracted to. And it's not just religious conversations. They have stuff about decor and clothes and just the things that us ladies like. But anyway, she's a regular blogger. She's written numerous books. She's been on a plethora of TV shows and radio shows. She's just very well versed in what she's doing. So it's a real treat to have her and her expertise here to share with us. And so here, I hope you enjoy the interview. Dr. Carrie Gress, welcome back to Thriving in the Trenches podcast.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back, Becky.
I love calling you Dr. Carrie Gress because it seems so formal, but I know that...
You don't normally call me that, do
you? No, I don't. I am so thankful to be able to have you back again, and here you are writing another wonderful book. But before we dive straight into that, I was hoping for our listeners who haven't heard our previous episode or haven't read any of your other books, I was hoping that you would tell them a little bit more about you. As I like to say, beyond the bio. Tell us something that your official bio might not tell us, but we want to get to know you.
Gracious. Well, there's a lot beyond the bio. The big thing is that I'm expecting my 5th child, so that's definitely not in the bio right now.
Congratulations.
Shocking pregnancy, but pretty excited about it. Yeah, I grew up in Oregon, and I eventually made my way out to Washington, D.C. with a few pit stops in Europe before I settled here with my husband. And I now end up writing a lot about women's issues. It's funny, when I was in graduate school, I said to myself, I will never write about women's issues. This is not my wheelhouse. I want nothing to do with it. And so I always laugh that, here I've written 2 or 3 books now about Catholic women's issues. But otherwise, I'm mainly a homeschooling mom, and I don't love homeschooling, but I love my kids. And so we have finally found a way to make it work for all of us so that I don't feel like I'm a failing mother and they're actually learning. And, thank God for online classes is all I have to say.
Amen to that.
But, so it's been a great balancing act for us. But, there's nothing like homeschooling to bring out and make very clear your own weaknesses. So I've been working on those. But, thank God we've been able to shore it up with some outside help. So that's been great.
That's awesome. I actually had a gal who was in college when she lived here. She sent me a message yesterday, and she said, "You're just such a saint for all those years of homeschooling." I'm like, I mean, really, honestly, I look back and, wow, actually, it just brought out all my sinful natures. So it's so hard to see it as a time of sainthood. And I guess I'm not a saint anymore. I don't know.
No, it is definitely a very challenging thing. And, I think it's amazing. There's some women that just flourish in it and are so good at it. And I'm just not one of those women. But, we do what we have to do. And so it's working for us, and we're going to do it one more year. So we'll see, we're taking it 1 year at a time, and we'll see what next year brings. But in the meantime, I feel like I'm on year number 5, and I feel like I finally figured out just how to balance it out so that the worst of my nature really isn't being brought out every day, all day long.
Right. I totally get that. I wish we would have had more online classes earlier on. But so kudos to you, my friend. Kudos to you. You've got great kids. So
thank you.
All right. So we're going to talk about some toxic femininity, the Auntie Mary exposed. And as any good author would do, is they'll they will share with their audience what kind of drove them to write that book. I know you wrote several articles through the last couple of years as you begrudgingly became a women's issue writer. And, just really what put it on your heart that said, I'm going to write a whole book on that?
Whole book on this topic. Well, I wrote a chapter about it actually in the Marian option. I discussed kind of this idea of, are we in this age of anti-Mary or the age of Mary? And that was where, when I wrote that book, the Marian option, is where I really started thinking about this idea of an anti-Mary, not as an individual, but as a spirit. And of course, in Scripture, St. John talks about the spirit of the Antichrist. Of course, we can also read in Revelation, the person of the Antichrist, but I don't mean it in that sense. I mean it more in St. John's meaning, that there's a spirit that sort of gripped women, and that we've kind of been, it's taken hold since the 1960s. And so initially, I just thought it was an interesting idea, but it was one of those ideas where I just felt like the more I dug, the more it was there. And it's funny, since I published the book, I've had people say, I can't unsee it now. I see the anti-Mary everywhere. And that was kind of my experience, was just like, it was just jumped out at me. And the research was so abundant. In fact, I really had to make kind of an editorial decision when I was writing the book, because there was just so many articles. There were so many stories. There were so many things that I could link to. But in a book, it's hard to sort of hyperlink to things, because people can't go back and, unless you're reading the Kindle, they can't go back and look at the original article or that kind of thing. So, and I also didn't want it to be the kind of book where you just went away just feeling like the world is ending and it's so awful. So I had to sort of selectively choose which articles I wanted to feature and put out there as examples of the anti-Mary. And of course, the first half of the book really lays out the problem of the anti-Mary, and then the second half is much more hopeful and looks at who Our Lady is and why she still remains this model for us, one that's accessible, and that we actually can have some hope in redeeming the world through her as our spiritual mother. So that was the nice part, was once I got through that first half of the book, and I think readers have this experience too.
Yes.
They walk away from the book feeling like, okay, this isn't all just awful. Because there's so many books that do that, where it just lays out the problem, and you just feel terrible at the end of the book, just really hopeless. So that was kind of one of my goals too, was to make sure that people didn't leave the book feeling like everything is just, going to hell in a handbasket kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, to be real, that the first part of the book where you give true historical examples of this anti-Mary spirit. Thank you for clarifying that it's a spirit, and we're not attacking persons. We are highlighting the spirit that is causing the person so much pain and suffering, whether they realize it or not, in their life. And so I feel like that's one of those main things we have to highlight about this book, is that you're not attacking a person. You're not, attacking is even an awful word. That's a very strong word, and I don't really mean that. But, this is a spirit. The Bible says that this is a battle, not of flesh and blood, but of principalities. And this applies in all facets of life. So that's the first thing I want to make sure that our listeners understand. If you haven't read the book, or maybe if you already did, and this first part of the book just made you feel disgusting, well, it probably should make you feel a little super uncomfortable because of the ugliness of what is happening with this anti-Mary spirit. And I feel like, Carrie, we're a little bit insulated and in a bubble in the spirit, as any evil spirit will do. They kind of water down the truth of the matter.
Yeah. Well, no, and I think that was what was interesting about just diving into the research and seeing all of this as a whole, because it's so easy to just sort of live your life and sort of see these examples of things that just aren't right, but you can't really put your finger on it. But to just go back and look at the roots of the feminist movement, and that's what I did. I looked at the 1960s and on, and who these women were. They're now considered the grandmothers of feminism. Who they were and what it is that they were trying to promote, and looking at kind of the underbelly of this movement, and it is not pretty. There is just a lot of incredibly broken people who, we know broken people break other people, and that's exactly what has happened. Also, even just to see how much these women all, almost to a one, had issues with their own mothers. And, it's just fascinating to see the different ways in which they lashed out. And, of course, even Betty Friedan in her work, The Feminine Mystique, which people largely attribute as sort of the kickoff of the whole movement in a dramatic way, she's describing in it the ache that has no name. And she's describing, housewives and this emptiness that they feel. Well, what she's describing, of course, is that desire that every human person has for God. She just didn't realize what she was describing. And so it's really fascinating to see, too, how much just ignorance of her own tradition, she was a Jewish woman, showed up in her own writings. If she had known anything about the tradition of her faith, she would have been able to see, this is a desire and a longing for God that we have. And we can also see this pattern play out, too, in terms of what these women were really embracing was something that cultures throughout millennia have been warning women against. That women, if you act in a certain way, it's going to lead to the destruction of your families and of culture. We can see it even in fairy tales, and I go into this in the book, too, but it's just fascinating to see how much they had to not know about history, culture, just basic fairy tales and human nature, that they had to sort of erase and think, we're doing something brand new here. Well, if you look back at mythology and whatnot, what they did was not new, and the results were very predictable, just that they didn't have that kind of education. And that's what's fascinating, too, is you can see how paganism always creeps in when the church is weak. And of course, back in the 60s, the church was kind of a disaster. After Vatican II, things really fell apart. And the church didn't have the strength to be able to sort of push out these bad ideas. And these women, like I said, didn't have the education, and they were totally broken, and they just kind of fell into these traps that, if you look historically, they have been there for every age has them and falls into this kind of idolatry. It's like a jungle just creeping in. Paganism will do that whenever Christianity is weak. So it's fascinating to just see these repeated patterns. And again, they thought that they were doing something brand new. And what was new was, of course, television and the media that they had to be able to spread these ideas in a very dramatic and radical way. That historically nobody had access to that kind of spreading of information. And that was really what I think it was, the combination of these ideas that felt new and fresh and liberating to women, and then coupling that with the images of very savvy, attractive women like Gloria Steinem on television. And that was kind of what did it. And then you add to that propaganda from places like Cosmopolitan magazine. I interviewed Sue Ellen Browder, who worked for them for 20 years, writing stories, and she makes it very clear that what they were targeting were women who were virgins or were mothers. Like a Cosmo girl could be anything, but she could not be either of those things. And so it's no accident that Mary is the Virgin Mother, and that's exactly what they're targeting in women, because Satan knows that our relationship with God is really built upon our purity. Blessed are those who are pure of heart, they shall see God. Our purity is a way through which we can draw closer to God and understand Him as our Father. And of course, motherhood is the other avenue to God as well. And so if you kind of knock a woman out at the knees by taking away both of those aspects of her life, then it's going to be very hard for her to not become broken and not to have a severing of her relationship with God. So it was very there's not a conspiracy in the sense that these women had any idea what they were doing. But if you look back and see this pattern, you can see very clearly that the goal really was this anti-Marian, anti-Virgin Mother emphasis, because of what happens when you target those two elements of the woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to go back to one point you made about the changing of nature. Mm-hmm. And I will say that in chapter 4, the big lie, changing human nature, I actually texted you when I got to the end of this chapter. I was sitting in the church waiting on some children who were going to confession. Excuse me. And it was the biggest light bulb moment for all the conversations about this topic, from reading everything. This was my big light bulb moment in the entire thought process. And so, and that was the changing of human nature, and that this is our ultimate goal. Like, this is how God created us to know Him. And it takes a change of nature, right? From the old man to the new man. And so this picture, or this analogy, I guess we can say, comparison, I don't know the exact term I'm trying to use here, but it's just in my face now. Yeah.
No, this was one of those insights that, I had so many insights that would come to me. I'd be like, how did I not see that before? But it started, of course, again, in the Marian auction, I was looking a lot at Fatima and Our Lady's predictions that if Soviet Russia wasn't converted, that she would spread her lies to the rest of the world. And so I was kind of fascinated by this idea, because, of course, we are seeing so much damage in the rest of the world. But I think that you can tie much of it back to Soviet Russia, that I think her prediction holds true, because what the Soviets were trying to do was to create a new person, the worker, or the robotnik. That's where our word robot comes from. That someone was no longer connected to the family, and it's really at the heart of it the destruction of the family. That's really what the goal of Soviet Russia was. So people will look at Soviet Union and say, the problems were really economic and sociological, and all kinds of other descriptions of what went wrong. But I think at the heart of it is they destroyed the family, and they tried to make women the exact same as men. And this is why, abortion was on demand. These people couldn't own property, but they could sure get an abortion any day of the week. And so you have, these horror stories of people who've had 50, 60, 70 abortions throughout their lives, because that's just what they did. But at the heart of it is, again, you're taking the mother out of the home, and the relationship between the husband and wife is no longer sacred. The relationship between the child and the mother is no longer sacred. And what's fascinating about all of this is that in Russia, this is something that was brought upon the Russians. It's like putting a saddle on a cat. People have made that description of it. It just didn't fit them at all. And yet, what's interesting is to see how we've taken these exact same ideas of, breaking up the family, where men are the enemy. This is one of the first lies, is that men are an enemy. We want to be both just like them, but we also want them to change. And this is where kind of the descriptions of toxic masculinity come from. But the bigger enemy is really our children. And you can see this, of course, in the rhetoric all day long. That a child will be an obstacle to your career and to your future happiness and to your success. And so the idea, of course, is that, we can have it all, but we just can't have a family at the same time. But what they want us to see is ourselves as working women. And so we've taken this on completely, just absorbed it into the culture. So it's no longer that saddle on a cat. It's just actually something that we don't even notice it anymore. It's just we've become so used to this and so focused on this idea that women are supposed to control things. We're the independent woman, we're powerful, and yet what we're not supposed to be is fruitful. And it's totally looked down upon, to have more than 2 children and to spend your life as a stay-at-home mother or homemaker. Those kinds of things are just completely verboten, really. You're not supposed to do those things. So it's interesting to see this pattern of how we've basically taken on Soviet Russia's attitudes about things, but we don't realize that's really where it came from. It came from Marx, and it really is this idea of separating us away from fruitfulness and giving us power. And of course, we know that when we go searching for things, we're not going to get them. I mean, the same thing is you can see this with feminine beauty. Women are striving to be beautiful all the time, and yet it ends up being sensual or just mere vanity. And so the beauty isn't really there. It's not authentic beauty. It's the same thing with power. And so it's fascinating to look at Our Lady, she's been called the most powerful woman in the world. She's also been said by every person who's ever seen her in an apparition that she was the most beautiful woman they ever saw. And it's because she's a reflection of God's will, of God's goodness, of God's beauty, of God's power, that she has all of these things. So we're sort of grasping at straws to get at these things that we can't ever quite attain because we're not doing it in the right way. We're not doing it in a godly way. So in any event, all of that is just to say it's interesting to see this pattern that we've kind of absorbed into our culture and think is very natural and normal. And this is just the way women are supposed to be and have always been meant to be. And not really realize there's this whole undercurrent that has come through Marx to us. And it is this desire to change our human nature, that we can be different, that we can be these workers. And we see this also, I think even the LGTB movement you can call it the kind of a fourth wave of feminism. The second wave, which is, the 1960s onward, they were really grouped together by this idea of abortion, and that brought them together. All these ideological differences that had among them were erased through abortion. And you can see that now, too, in women's movements. As long as you're for abortion, you're sort of embraced by the cause, no matter what else you think. And the same is true with the LGTB movement, where, you're embraced by the group as long as you're for a distorted version of sexuality. So it's these sins that are rallied around that are really shaping these groups and ideologies. And at the heart is this desire to say, we're different. We're totally different than, we don't need families. We don't need to be fruitful. We can live our lives in a very different kind of way. And that's just the sad thing, because of course we know that these ultimately are not going to lead to happiness. And, the stories are just endless about women who have bought into this lie, and now they're 50, 60, 70 years old, and they're miserable, and they just live with these incredible regrets. I don't have children. I don't have a husband. I may have a lot of money. I may have had a great career, but, at the end of the day, when you're on your deathbed, those are not the things that people hang on to. It's relationships and the beauty of the family and the gifts that come through that. And those are things you can't give to somebody at 70 or 80 years old. They have to be part of a life well lived. And we're not offering women that as an option in our culture anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hear that and I think, well, thank God he is the Redeemer, because even someone who is at that point in their 70s and 80s and they are dying alone, and I don't mean that to be an over dramatic thing. It happens all the time. And if you have an ounce of charity and love in your heart, then that should break your heart. That should that should break our hearts.
Well, and the worst part about it too is, of course, we know what the accuser does. We know that Satan just, gets in there and just makes them feel even worse, and says it's your fault, and on and on and on, and so it's harder for them to find the Redeemer, to find that love and the mercy, and that's all the more reason why we need to reach out to to people like in this situation, because it's got to be incredibly difficult to sort of battle all those demons on all those different levels after you've lived a life, following all these lies from the culture.
Oh man, yes, I'm sure there are already ministries and groups of organizations that is, if it's not already there, we're going to need it, and that is to reach out and minister that specific demographic of Instead of the widow, these are those who are, dying without family, lonely, and like you said, lost, and still hearing the lies of the evil one, which means they don't even feel like they can reach out to have someone help them through that process. But I want to say this. I feel like part of this is my own personal, and I know that I can't be alone, but when you say the errors of Russia and the lies of Russia, how many of us really have no clue what that is? I know I was one. I mean, we have become pretty historically weak, are knowing what our history is. And so to who is Marx? How many people? I had to really go back and reread Marxism and all right, that's what that is. And I had to kind of study this book because you spoke about so many things that I wasn't familiar with, which is good. It made me learn more and understand so much more, even what Our Lady is sharing with us in Fatima about the lies of Russia. Well, what does that mean? And so would you agree that a lot of people have really no clue that we're just repeating history or we're buying into the lies of Russia?
I think absolutely. And this is the hard thing, of course, about just what's happened in our schools and education systems. I mean, the fact that we have socialism cropping back up again. I mean, basically, socialism is an issue, and infanticide has been a major issue this year. And it's no accident those two are coupled together. They're kind of just two sides of the same coin based on Marxism. So I didn't want to go into Marxism too deeply in this book. There are a lot of great resources out there. Actually, one of the most stirring ones is the testimony of Bella Dodd, who had been a communist, and she was trying to help the communists infiltrate both the church and the United States. And she ended up having this huge conversion. Fulton Sheen was the priest that brought her into the church, and just an amazing story. But she talks very explicitly about just the role of communism and how actively they were trying to infiltrate these different areas. And so it's overwhelming when you start looking at it. But I think it's overwhelming before you get into it, because they just sound obscure, like who's Karl Marx and what does he have to do with anything? And yet we're kind of soaking and marinating in the ideas of Marx without even realizing it. I think that's one of the things that's kind of frustrating. But I also didn't want this book to feel like a heavy history lesson. So there's a lot of great, I know there's a documentary that came out recently. I think it's called A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. I haven't seen it yet, but I know it's been playing on EWTN, and you can get it on Amazon, and it's supposed to be excellent. I've heard really great reviews of that for just kind of summarizing the situation if people want to go deeper. But I think it's enough to just even look at what this idea behind, trying to change human nature. Human nature is just, it's always going to win. You can't, this is one of the reasons why human nature hasn't changed. This is why we can look back at the Iliad and the Odyssey and still find compelling pieces of this. I love the Odyssey. I love when Odysseus gets home and his relationship with Penelope. And, there's so many beautiful things in that are just so moving and heart-wrenching. And if our human nature had changed, we wouldn't be able to relate to that. We wouldn't, obviously some stories speak to us more than others, but at the very core, there's so many pieces about us that haven't changed. And I think that was the other fun part of the book, was really to look at, well, what does it mean to be a woman? Because I don't think we think about it enough anymore. What do I have as a woman that I can do that men can't do? Of course, having a child is the most obvious thing, but that's just a great symbol of who we are meant to be in general. Even looking on a spiritual level, I think we dismiss too much what it is that those amazing holy women are doing, in cloistered nuns. The fact that we still have cloistered nuns is pretty remarkable and says something about it as an important pointer to what femininity is. But you can see in the lives of these women that they have this deep, profound experience of God and they know themselves to be daughters of God the Father. In fact, I just posted an article on our site, Theology of Home, about how nuns don't have midlife crises. There's just this incredible peace and joy that they have because they're in this constant relationship with God the Father, which doesn't mean that they don't have dryness and periods of struggle, but they know how to deal with them and get through them. But more importantly, I love looking at these women and seeing God plant seeds in them, and they're the ones that receive this seed, and then the seed grows, and the seed becomes something far larger than they ever imagined. So imagine someone like Mother Teresa. She's in Ireland. She's just living a quiet life there, and God plants a seed. You need to go to India. So she goes to India. She's following along his path, and of course we know her to have created the Missionaries of Charity, which are around the world. But she basically birthed this idea, so we can see this great parallel between what happens to a woman biologically and what happens to her spiritually. And God wants to give all of us both of those things. Many of us are called to be biological mothers or adoptive mothers, but we're called to the spiritual fruit as well. And, that's the beauty of the fact that we can receive the Eucharist every day, that these seeds can be planted in us, and we just have to be open to them. And these seeds are not just biological motherhood, but there's a spiritual motherhood element there as well. And this is, what Mother Teresa did. This is why she's called Mother, because she's taking these people into her heart and soul and bringing healing to them, even as they're dying biologically. She's helping them come to wholeness and come to know their dignity, that they are loved as children of God, even as they're living this incredible poverty in their death. And that's what women do, is we take things into ourselves and we make them better. And even looking at our arms, I always love the example of how, my arms are bent, women's arms are bent in a way that we can cradle a child. Men's arms are not bent that way. And, we have kind of a bend at our elbow, and theirs just goes straight out if you hold it out in front of you. Mm-hmm. We have hips and breasts, and all of these things point to this capacity to nurture and to transform others by the love that we have. And you can see this certainly in the Blessed Mother. We speak of her as a mother, and Christ as the fruit of her womb. This isn't accidental. This is very important, that she's a mother, and her embrace and the transforming power she has through her yes. So anyway, it's the book goes into a lot too about thinking about more deeply about what it means to be a woman outside of the context of our careers, and what it is that we're supposed to be doing outside the home.
Mm-hmm. Well, in your book, as you get into, so let's leave all that yucky Marxism and demons mm-hmm. and all that good stuff out, and like you said, let's move on into the hope-filled. And I am such a believer in stories and sharing how the Lord has worked in everybody's lives in some way. And in your book, you share that, you had believed in these lies. And even, if you'll share a little bit about where you were before, and then what you were searching for, and what did bring authentic happiness, because you even share a story about when you were a mother, and you were trying to understand what this mothering feeling was, because as I remember, you kind of struggled with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a bundle of questions in there,
I know.
Becky,
Sorry. Just pick it apart and go with where you want to go.
So, just go with the flow.
Go. Yes.
No, I mean, what's interesting is I think looking at my own life, I know this book was fascinating for so many reasons, because when I was in high school, I was deeply fascinated with Our Lady of Medjugorje and with Our Lady of Lourdes and just all these apparition sites. And, I went to a Catholic high school, and I was really poorly catechized. So my father passed away 2 weeks after my 16th birthday, and our family was supposed to actually go to Medjugorje the year before he died, and then he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died, 8 months later. So I ended up going just by myself with a group of students from my high school, and still, had an amazing trip, and it was definitely a true pilgrimage. But there was so much fruit from that. But the hard thing is when you're not well catechized, the fruit can only go so deeply. So I'll never forget when I finally went to confession, and I was still trying to, I was trying to go to daily mass. I was going to confession regularly. But if you don't know, that certain sins are mortal sins, you can just only get so far. So I'll never forget, I was actually after college, I was in a Marian conference and I went to confession, and the priest said something about drunkenness. And I was like, wait, drunkenness is a mortal sin? It was one of these things where it was like, of course it is. But I had no idea, because I think that I felt like the priests that had heard my confessions were just so happy to see a young woman in the confessional that they never challenged me or asked me, or I just didn't have good resources. And of course, this was before the internet, so it's not like I could look things up. And you were kind of at the mercy of whatever local Catholic bookstore there was, and your libraries and that kind of thing. So, but in addition to all this, I'm poorly catechized, but I still have this devotion to Our Lady. But I'm writing my senior thesis on the Buddhist idea of enlightenment in Zen Buddhism. But I'm also a grandmother who's totally involved in New Age movement. And I loved her very, very deeply, and just wanted to be close to her. And so as a result, I would listen to her, and, she took me to have my astrological chart read and showed me the chart she had made for me when I was born. And, she was really took crystals and all of these different books. So when I was researching this project, there's, this whole area of so-called scholarship called the Goddess Movement that has really risen up since the 70s. And so I'm reading all the books that are associated with it. And sure enough, I read a large number of them because she had passed them on to me. And, the whole idea being that there's a goddess within us, and once we identify it, then we're powerful. And anyway, it's pretty scary and sketchy stuff, because it's not really based on anything other than sort of fabricated things from the 1970s. But so I still marvel at that period of my life that I actually got through it, and, with any faith. And I know that, much of it had to do with these amazing women. They were all my mom's age, who prayed the rosary every Thursday morning at my high school. And so I was a college student, and I would just go join them Thursday mornings and pray the rosary with them. And it was really through them that I learned about Marian consecration, and just kind of kept getting fed really good content. And I think that was really the turning point. So I can even see there, these kind of dueling mothers of sorts, where you've got, women trying to offer me their wisdom. And, thanks be to God, I had some women that had the ability to give me the truth, and something that was peace-giving and life-giving, and actually good for me. So anyway, I think it's interesting to sort of see how much we're formed, though, by the culture, because if it hadn't been for those women, I probably would still be grasping and searching and looking and trying to find things. And I think that's one of the big struggles about this anti-Marian movement, is it's because of this group that I've called the matriarchy, makes it incredibly hard to find information beyond what they want us to read. So, it's in the fashion industry, it's in politics, it's in Hollywood, it's in our pop music. And the basic idea, of course, is that we have to have abortion, and we have to fight the patriarchy. It's all the same rhetoric from 50 years ago, and yet we just haven't put up a good fight against it. So this is why they're still using this exact same rhetoric that their grandmothers and great-grandmothers used, because it seems to be effective, and women still think, the patriarchy is bad, even though we don't really know what that means anymore. Right. So anyway, I guess long story short, though, it was also really challenging for me to sort of feel close to who Our Lady was. And I think a lot of that was just feeling like I didn't know who she was, because I didn't understand her virtues, because I'd never really thought about meekness as a good thing. I think we tend to go from thinking of, an independent woman, or she's not an independent woman, she's a doormat. And this is kind of our options. And of course, those are the two extremes. But Our Lady offers us an example of authentic womanhood. But because it's so unfamiliar to us, it's really hard for us to approach it. And so I talk about that kind of at length in the book, of how do we start to understand what it means to be meek. And, meekness is one of those things that was amazing to sort of see what it means. It really means, Jesus and Mary are both described as meek. Well, no one would describe Jesus as a doormat. I mean, he wasn't just being passive, but there was purpose behind it, and he was controlling his own emotions and his own anger and aggression and frustration, and all of the attending emotions that must go with being crucified publicly by your own people. And so I think that's that incredible virtue of being, and I think a lot of us long for this, where we're in control of our emotions so much that even though we may be feeling something very strongly, we still can respond in a way that we want to, in the way that is in accord with what we know to be good. And so that's really, meekness is actually associated with training horses. You can imagine a stallion or an incredibly powerful horse, and they're bridled, and you have to bring them under control. And that's kind of what happens with us when we're meek, is we have the capacity to control our emotions instead of living by them and responding to every little single one and making sure everybody knows exactly how we feel all the time. So I think it was those kinds of realizations that I just didn't know who she was from the inside. I could see who she was on the outside and felt very saccharine and, one-dimensional. But I had to start understanding what these virtues were, such that I could understand her from the inside. And of course, having my own children helped a lot, because it made me realize just how much she loves us and the good she wants to give us. But yeah, I had to definitely grow in virtues and things like patience and compassion and whatnot, to be able to understand her better from the inside.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that picture of bridling a horse. And I know I've heard you say it before, and it was a real humdinger for me when I heard it. It was probably at least a year or two ago. I was listening to something else, and you made the comment about controlling our emotions, not letting our emotions control us. And it sounds like meekness is that virtue that we should be praying for, so that we aren't driven by our emotions. And to clarify, I think a lot of people might feel like what I could be saying is stuff down your emotions. Your emotions aren't valid, all kinds of things in that direction. But that's not what I'm saying. It is okay to say I'm angry. It is okay to say I'm frustrated, but to communicate or maybe it's not time to communicate it. Maybe I don't need to let the whole world know I'm frustrated. I need to take it to the Lord and ask him to show me in my own self, in my own sinfulness, what is driving that emotion. What can I let him heal? What part of me can I let him heal, so that I don't always respond in that way?
Yeah. No, and I think that's one of the hard things about social media, is it has really encouraged us. It sort of was like adding a match to this sense that somehow every emotion had to be validated at every single point in the day. And yet, especially if you're dealing with children, children are all emotion. And if the mother's all emotion, what a disaster you've got. There's got to be somebody who is controlling the situation and who's leading and ordering and helping them understand how to order their emotions simultaneously. Yeah. So it's, this is another one of the lies, though, of course, is that, every emotion that we experience is meant to be felt by others. And that we're really driven by our emotions. But instead, we've forgotten that we have the capacity to be logical and to say, I don't want this to run and control my life, but I want to be able to control it with the goal in mind of, what am I made for? I'm made, if your vocation is you're made to be a mother, well, then you can't operate if you're constantly living by your own passions and whatnot. I mean, you can't form relationships that way. You can't have enduring relationship with your spouses. I mean, everything just kind of comes apart at the seams when we have that experience. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the big problems that we have unleashed as well, is just this kind of the kingship of emotions in our lives.
Well, and you said earlier that we are drawn to beauty, especially as women. It's no lie that we are all searching for beauty, and that explanation or description of Our Lady, anyone who has experienced a vision of Mary, the most common way that she is described is by the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And as you were sharing that, I just kept thinking, and as you were describing why she's beautiful, she's full of grace. She is full of God and full of virtue, which is why we have to keep emptying out our own self and the sinful part of us. And the more holy we become, the more beautiful we become, the authentic beauty, not the beauty that fades away, when your Botox has faded away or, whatever you're using to pursue this worldly.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the fascinating, beauty itself is probably one of those topics I could just talk about for days, because women are so driven by it. But why are we driven by it? I think that's a fascinating question. Why are men not driven by it? Now we have, of course, metrosexuals, and it's becoming more popular, but this is fundamentally not something that men really concern themselves with. But why are women so fixated on this? And part of it is because Satan's whispering in our ear, you can control men if you're beautiful and if you're sensual, and it's a way to manipulate. But it's also a way to free people. And I think that's one of the things that this is the piece that we miss, is our beauty can be used to make us, to help us be a bridge for people to heaven or a bridge to hell. We have that capacity through who we are. And, it even comes back to this idea of women are not weak. We are incredibly powerful. And we're seeing the way that this power, when not used well, can really destroy a culture. And we're seeing this in spades in our own culture. But what we're missing is how incredible the power is when it's really used for good. And this is what Our Lady offers us as this model. And we can see this throughout the lives of all these women saints who said yes to God, who, in the same way that Our Lady had to say yes to God, they said, yes, thy will be done, and they followed it. And, if you look at someone like St. Catherine of Siena, St. Bridget of Sweden, St. Helen, St. Monica, what these women achieved in their lives is just is miraculous and incredible, and even dwarfs what, the major achievements that contemporary women achieved. Because, Hildegard of Bingen is another fascinating example. But it's because, again, when we're searching for God's will, we get everything. But when we're searching for anything less than God's will, then we usually end up with not very much. And this is, again, the beauty piece is fascinating to me, because women are meant to help elevate the souls of men. Men talk about this, and I always feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about it, because I obviously am not a man and I don't have this experience, but I've had enough men tell me, and I've read enough about it, and you can, every single poem and country music lyrics and, all of this points to the kind of woman that men love. And, it's not the naggy woman in the pantsuit who's telling him to take the garbage out. There's something about this woman that she brings peace to him, and she stills his soul, and she feels like home, and she elevates him and lifts him up in ways that men don't do for each other. And this is what women are supposed to do. And Fulton Sheen has this great quote about how you can measure the level of a civilization based on its women, because the men will always follow the women. And what happens when you live in a civilization where the women are now following the men? We have women cursing the same numbers, if not more, than men are. We have women living promiscuously. We are not offering men anything to look up to and to make themselves better for. And so they're not doing it. And it's just this recognition that we are the soil of the culture, and that the seeds are planted in, and the only good garden can grow if there's good soil. Any farmer can tell you that. And this is one of the reasons why the anti-Marian spirit has been so effective, and you can see why Satan has used it, because it really just, once you get the women, you get everybody. So it is an interesting thing to look at all of this and see just the role that beauty does play. It's not a superficial something that is nice when it's there, but it's a genuine gift to us, especially the holier we become, the more beautiful we become. And Mother Teresa is another one of those great examples.
Oh yeah,
she was not a beautiful woman, but everybody says she's just so beautiful, and they were so drawn to her, and they wanted to be close to her. And so you can see that, beauty becomes intangible when it's God's beauty versus, the Botoxed, stretched, kind of beauty that so many women are searching for in our lives today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you've heard, many people say I'm a better version of me when I'm with you. And so really, as the gospel commands us, is to go out and share the good news. And I pray that through this interview that these words will touch someone's heart and they will hear the good news so that they can find that joy that they're looking for, that the lasting happiness that they're looking for, not a shot of Botox. I'm not like knocking on Botox, but it's a great analogy. The shot of something that's going to make you happy, but it's only going to last a few weeks. And then you're going to have to go back for some more. And, but God's love is everlasting. Virtue is everlasting. Heaven is eternal. And this is our home. That's where we're all, even those who have bought into the lie that we need to change into the standards of the world, whatever this anti-Mary spirit, whatever it has whispered to any of us, the lies that it has whispered, we are searching for home, and home is not of this world. And the only way to get there is to reject the things of this world and to become more holy. And so I really do pray, Carrie, that our conversation can do that in the lives of some. And may we all go out and share the truth and love on. Your very last chapter is, helping the walking wounded and going out there and loving on those who are now in the depths of despair, or they're just, maybe not even that drastic, but they're just walking around wondering, what in the world am I doing? Why do I feel so alone? Why do I feel so empty? And may we just love on those people and change the world one little soul at a time.
Well, and I think this is the one thing that as Catholic women we forget, and we can be kind of on the defensive and apologetic about our faith. You can't use contraception and all those kinds of things. But the reality is that there's no better place, and there has been no better place for women than the Catholic Church. This is where our dignity has come from. No other world religion has offered this to women. Up until this stage, women, until Christ came, women were really seen as chattel and as slaves. And Christ and, of course, Our Lady and devotion to her has changed all of that. And so it's ironic that people are railing against the church, not realizing this is where, our understanding of our dignity comes from. But we also have to remember that, we have the greatest tool in our hands, and it is this capacity to offer Our Lady and the Eucharist and all of these amazing sacraments and all of these gifts to women. But we need to sort of be on go on offense instead of constantly feeling like we have to be apologetic for our faith, but that we have something truly wonderful and amazing to give to the world. That's what we need to be reminding people about, and helping them transform their lives through the church instead of hiding it from them and thinking, this is just going to be a burden for them, because there's really no one happier than Catholic women.
I love that. I love that. It's true. And if anyone is listening and they have moved away from the church because of all the scandals, or they've moved away because they had a bad priest or a bad experience in the church, please know that the church is full of fallen people, but the church is home. It is truly home, because that is where Christ is living present in the Eucharist, in adoration, in the sacraments. And I just want to invite you to come home, because this is where true home is, and true joy is, and healing, to really walk through that healing process of the hurts that we all have. We all have hurts. And I just want to invite people home. So, Carrie, thank you so much for your tireless work. I know you're tired. I don't know why tireless is used on that, but I know you're doing something that is getting people talking and thinking and changing. I know you've had lots of feedback from people who have actually walked away from those damaging lifestyles, and they are coming home.
Praise God.
Yeah. So
no, and it's been fun hearing about husbands and wives reading the book together and, creating discussion among themselves. And anyway, it's kind of one of those books where you just never know what you're going to hear next about it. But it's bearing incredible fruit. So I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah, I love that. Let's ask the question of where in my life today, even me, who I'm very aware of this anti-Mary spirit and the toxic femininity, but where am I still living in that lie today? Because I know I have to be. Mm-hmm. I'm still buying into lies, and I don't realize it yet. So maybe that's a great probing question for all of us to ask ourselves, Lord, or ask the Lord, where am I today still living in this lie, and it's robbing me of joy and happiness with the life.
I think that's a great question for each of us each day, because it's out there in spades.
Yes, absolutely. And watered down. And so we don't even really see it as it is. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Becky. I appreciate you.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Thriving in the Trenches. I have hope that it will have encouraged you in your journey and that you will know the love of God even more intimately. Please share this podcast with a friend on your social media pages or leave a review in iTunes. You are welcome to join me on our Instagram or Facebook group where we can grow in friendships. Thanks for coming.